Hi, Misha, and we're trying to catch time to shoot during intermissions and rain, and trying to think of something different to bring out. Decided to do 45s and kind of my classic here, Colt M45A1. It's been several videos, but it's been a minute since we've fired it. Same gun I've had for roughly a decade. It has its charms, and it has its shortcomings, but hasn't been out in a while, so let's change that. M45A1. Of course, I wanted to shoot my good old M45 again. In fact, that's why I own this gun, is to have a modern shooter. But I also wanted to let Fox try it and let him shoot some 45. We mostly shoot 9mm out of handguns. So with no further ado, let's put it in his hands and get his first impressions. Now Fox with the M45.
Open.
What do you think?
Dude, I like it. A lot of felt recoil. Of course, it is a 1911, but the trigger is amazing. I like it a lot, man. It's a good looking gun too. I do love this grip. Feels good. Mostly the trigger. You notice that a whole lot. But yeah.
Yep, and that's the standard, not the custom shop trigger too.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine. I think with gloves on it could get a little hairy. Don't have much room in there anyways, but it was a real fun to shoot. I'm just not a 1911 person, but kind of goes back to when you first handed me this gun earlier. I just couldn't stop looking at it or feeling of it. The grip and just the aesthetics of it. It's just a beautiful gun.
And we come to the table to talk about how the M45A1 CQBP close quarters battle pistol came to be. Whether you think it was a great idea or the most ridiculous thing ever, we can both agree that there's a story here. Yeah. And it's really because of this pistol, the Beretta M9, which went through trials in the early 80s and was officially adopted in 1985 and intended for all branches to replace 1911 A1s that were frankly getting very long in the tooth, especially after Vietnam. Nominally, all of the frames, at least, that the military had were 1945 or older, although replacement slides and whatnot had been purchased over the years, and there were probably some COTS purchases here and there. Regardless, the Marines were not thrilled about the Beretta, and so as early as 1986 they started looking into rebuilding their existing 1911s, and by rebuild, depending on exactly what was needed, a lot of times they only reused the frame. Sometimes the frame and the slide. But it was a total rebuild. And this would become known quickly as the M45. And this version was mostly for MUSOC, MARSOC, and SOCOM in general. Advanced Forces, Expeditionary Forces, and the Marines, not standard issue. If a standard Marine was to get one, he'd still probably get an M9, at least after the Gulf War. And this is of course just my old Remington Rand, but it could have been turned into one, were reworked at Quantico by Marine Armors, and they were hand-fitted, put together, and the parts were more or less commercial parts. There are several specs over the years, but some consistencies were improved sights, ambidextrous safeties, improved beaver tail / safeties there, updated grips, early on at least Pakmar. They typically wanted to put match barrels in and do something about the trigger. Usually new extractors and mag catches. And they started using Wilson combat mags when those were available. Well, this was okay in the 90s. You know, these small procurement, small orders, small ability. They were only able to do 50, 60 a year, but that was enough to replace for attrition. That was until, of course, 2001 and the War on Terror began, and then the need went up drastically. Also, Colonel Robert Young was outlining, well, how can we update and evolve the good old Browning 1911 for the 21st century. You could think of 1911 A1. While the armorers at Quantico continued to do their thing, building M45s, Cott's purchase was approved in 2003 to buy some Kimbers. These would be some of the first new guns that had entered the Marine Corps or even the U.S. Army in a long time, new 1911s. This would be followed up by a purchase order for about 150 Springfields, their professional series, operator types, in 2005 as things were heating up in Iraq. So between injecting a few new 100 guns in and kind of figuring out what would and wouldn't work, this got them by. But in 2010, they again returned to the idea of a 1911, a 45 ACP gun, and that's really where this comes from. By the way, the interim guns were known as the ICQB, Interim Close Quarters Battle Pistol. So the names in the Marine Corps are interesting. In fact, even the Beretta M9 would make a little more splash in the Corps around the same time. Just a little brief sidetrack to talk about the Beretta M9A1. Now, the company Beretta introduced the 92A1 around the time that rails were starting to become popular in the early 21st century. And around 2005, 2006, the Marine Corps, who had never been happy with the original too much, would actually look into it and request some updates and changes, and would adopt the M9A1, originally ordering 7,500 and then ordering an additional 500 in 2008. For example, they wanted a checkered front strap. They wanted a beveled magwell for faster insertions, and this would be one of the earlier guns, sorry, my cord, to have PVD coating on the mag, which was a really good coating for hot, dry, dusty, sandy, grimy areas. And they would introduce a more standardized rail for it, and yeah, they would serve in the Marine Corps as another kind of interim measure. Of course, this is a 9mm, which the Marines didn't necessarily care for. But of course, it does have 15 shots versus 7, or maybe 8 if you have an extended mag in your 1911. And it does have double or single action. And of course, it has a safety and decocker unit. I do it here one-handed. So it had some benefits. Certainly it was a safer gun than the old 1911s without the firing pin block. Actually, last year had this out briefly, and J-Ro, who is a big 1911 fan, ran a couple of mags through it, and then gave us a little commentary. So let's go over to that real quick. J-Ro with the M9A1. So what'd you think?
It's a Beretta.
Yes.
I mean, I've always kind of preferred the G conversion that's decocker only. But at least you don't have that first really long, slow, heavy pull on this, the double action pull. For me, ergonomically, Berettas have always been a little uncomfortable to shoot because they've got this big palm swell. They're kind of thick. For people with big hands, they're perfect. I have kind of short fingers, so it's a little bit of a reach for me. But Wilson actually does this cool conversion on these where they round off this front trigger guard, and they also, in their Centurion model, they take a lot of this back strap down and flatten it so that the back is a lot more like a 1911. And for me, that's actually a lot more comfortable. But no, it's a clean shoot. I like them a lot. For people who like Berettas, it's a great gun.
And I would say Wilson did it first, but with the M9A3s and even now the A4s, it seems like Beretta kind of took a note because they've done something quite similar with the newer grips.
Well, and there's been a lot of cross collaboration between like Ernest Langdon, Bill Wilson, a lot of the things that they've done to kind of rejuvenate interest in the Berettas. Beretta did stand up and take note. And so they've started making a lot of those adaptations themselves. But this is straight classic Beretta FS, and it's a good shoot.
The decocker only, I totally get. That would be like the French 92G variant. His talk about the not long front pull was because he started it off in single action mode. Of course, in double action mode, it has the longer pull. Although newer guns like this would have the polymer coated but still metal cord trigger versus the solid metal trigger. And I see what he's saying about it being for big hands. Now, one thing they did to kind of alleviate that a little bit, they actually scalloped the back here, letting you choke up on it a little bit higher and getting a little bit closer in, slightly shorter trigger pull. So that helped a little bit. But as we were discussing, a lot of the things that Wilson and other custom shop things pioneered would end up appearing in Beretta's A3, and of course now we're on to the A4 series. And the Marines would use these for a little bit, and this being a commercial version of their M9A1. But wrapping back around to 2010, the need was still pressing. The war in Afghanistan was dragging on. Iraq was still going on. Attrition was taking place. More and more members were in SOCOM, MUSOC, and there were many at the top of the Marine Corps that were just not ready to quit the 1911. So, a tender was sent out. The process went quite quickly because it wasn't considered a new design by the Marine Corps. It was considered an update, an improvement, in addition to the M45, which of course itself was a 1911. 3 main companies responded, and actually Springfield was maybe the early favored. They had already sold some pistols, the Marine Corps had some, and they submitted a variant of the operator, the loaded version. It had a standard 1913 rail, and for whatever reason they did a two-tone finish with black and green. Another company, which really never stood a chance, if we're being honest, Carl Lippert Designs, submitted their variant of a close quarter battle pistol that was essentially much more custom, even taking a lot of custom parts, even having a more or less proprietary rail, at least a non-standard. And Colt came in kind of in the middle with a variant of its so-called rail gun, which did have a rail, but it was not exactly a full standard 1913 rail. It had a bit of a curve to it because of the frame. It had Novak night sights, and from the beginning it had this kind of sandy, light tan Cerakote finish. And yep, the Marines picked the Colt. Is it any wonder? I mean, after all, General William Keyes was over at Colt, and Marines, And so it was announced on July 20th that the CQBP, the M45A1, was being ordered from Colt, although some changes were made. The initial order was for 4,036, with a potential extension of up to 8,000 more, and deliveries were pretty much scheduled to begin immediately. And much was made about it back at the time. I was there, I remember. And it's interesting how it is kind of turned out over the last decade. But with that, let's talk about what makes this gun different from this gun. M45A1. Open. At the beginning of the video, you might have noticed my holster rig here. This holster actually came to me via a serviceman who had it over in Iraq. And it's meant for a railed 1911 like the M45A1. Kind of a slick design. I kind of like drop leg. They feel convenient to me. Extra storage here for one of the Wilson combat mags, if I can get it out, which would be the standard for these, and then 2 additional mags here, although these are actually 8-rounders, so somewhat non-standard. But hey, this is MARSOC. Non-standard's kind of the name of the game, right? So what is the CQBP, the M45A1 from Colt's Manufacturing, Colt's Defense, the Pony People? Alright, we already talked about how this came from the Colt railgun, which first appeared around 2009-2010. It's a whole series. But they needed a true 1913 full-spec Stenag rail. The one on the railgun is actually a little bit curved and tapered. To that end, they beefed up the frame just a little bit, more squared off, so it's a slightly heavier, larger frame. They also reworked the slide serrations to make a few larger ones, and they gave it more stainless steel internal components. It has Novak front and rear night sights, and I believe some might have also had Trijicon, but I could be wrong on that. As I mentioned, Wilson 47 mags are standard in the black, 7-shot, but the Marines had plenty of older mags, so either one could be used, and I think that's probably why they did that. This was designed to replace the aging M45 and even some of the ICQB pistols, the interim pistols. And this was kind of the baby of General Keyes, who incidentally left Colt soon after. He retired soon after this was announced. It was a contract for over $22 million for Colt, so quite good. They used some innovations from other companies, including Wilson. This looks very much like a Wilson safety and whatnot. I'm not saying they made it, but copied from. On the other hand, the unique dual recoil assembly is something designed in-house by Colt. We do have a national match stainless steel barrel, national match bushing, triggers between 4.5 and 5 pull weight, of course grips, but this is not a small gun. It's a 1911. It is about 8.3 inches long overall. The barrel is right at 5 inches, and overall weight unloaded is just shy of 2.5 pounds. And of course 7+1 capacity as standard. That said, let's go to the table and compare some of the features with prior generations of 1911. Ithaca again.
Ithaca.
So I thought we'd come to the table, kind of laying out 3 generations of, well, I was going to say Colt, but really 1911. course, here's the original 1911. I don't think on the main channel you guys have seen this one. On my personal channel I've shown it off. It's quite an old one, but it's honest for what it is. It's Colt, of course. Been through the wars. And here's my Ithaca that you've seen before. Made in World War II. I don't know why, but I like the Ithaca branded ones. They just, I don't know, they delight me. And then, of course, our M45A1. Most likely the last full military American 1911 style, maybe even 45 ACP, maybe not, pistol. Have a little time. So being at end with almost exactly 100 years separating these two. 1911 officially to 2012. And you can see a lot of the changes were quite small. In fact, in theory, magazines are totally interchangeable, even though they're different. So here's the early dual tone mag with the lanyard loop. They went to, of course, away from that with World War II, standard 7-shot. And they kept the 7-shot, but they went to the Wilson M47 mag. Interesting they didn't go with the 8. As Jerry was pointing out, this is probably what put Wilson on the map and one of their best-selling things. It's a good mag. Simple, but it'll work. Nice follower on it. Other areas they like to change them. This has the smooth back strap. Then they went to the hump. The ribbing, slightly changed that. Then they went back to the smooth, but they kept it ribbed. And of course they went to the modern style. All have lanyard rings, of course, and what have you. Of course, the sights also changed from the very small originals to the slightly improved ones on the A1s, and there's actually variations of these depending on when they were made. You know, Colt, Ithaca, Remington. A little bit better, more open. And of course our M45 has 9 sights and modern style. So yeah, definitely a change there. And of course we have a rail underneath for whatever, but no mount for a little red dot. The grips also, of course, these are the G10, the kind of synthetic laminate type grips. And they're just kind of a natural progression of what we like to think of as Bakelite. It was on the A1. And of course that in turn replaced the original wonderful checkered old school diamond wood grips. Funny thing is too, again, they should be within, reason of, spec, interchangeable. The trigger, of course, is long, smooth, no scallops. Then you go to the A1 and you get a scalped frame and a short trigger with patterning. Again, this one is checkered, some are ribbed. Just depends on the make in World War II. And of course, most of these have all been rebuilt. And of course, this is kind of combining the two again with the long, and it has some vertical ribbing on the trigger. So there's actually quite a few small original elements, at least takes on them, even on the newest pistol. But then again, it has plenty of other things like front slide serrations, an enlarged ejection port, the skeletonized commander style hammer, the extended beaver tail, none of which you'll see on these. This has the small A1 hammer. It was reduced in size to not have it catch or kind of catch your web of your finger if it comes, or thumb when it comes back. This one, the original, has a larger spur, which I like, but the reason this was added was for cavalry back in the day, and not many horses, at least in the American military by World War II. Things changed. I don't think there's anything else to talk about, really. Of course, the springs are definitely different and improved in here with the double spring system, which I do admit, while shooting it, does change the recoil pattern quite a bit. Historic gun, but in no way what I would consider current. Let's just be honest with ourselves. But that's not to say it can't be enjoyed. Far, far from it. M45A1.
Good.
So, how does this compare to the guns shipped to the U.S. Marine Corps? It's identical. Now, Colt has had two separate SKUs, a custom shop version and a standard version. And the reason, aside from just cost, I went with the standard is this is what they shipped to the Marines. The custom shop, while a nicer gun maybe, has an oversized barrel and an additionally tuned trigger, hand-fitted, and other little bells and whistles. It also comes in a Pelican case with an Otis kit and Wilson mags, whereas this just comes in a standard Colt plastic box with 2 mags. I should say that these are all hand-fitted. They even need to put the last digits of the serial on parts like the back strap, the safety, the slide, the barrel. Surprised I don't do it on the grips too, which is quite abnormal for a modern gun. But that's kind of the 1911 for you. It was designed at a time when hand fitting was just the way, and even with modern technology, there's still something involved, especially when you're doing these kinds of guns. But the custom shop version has additional hand fitting. They all originally came with this light Cerakote finish. And you might think about the markings, that the Marine versions are marked USMC and the civilians are marked M45A1. Not true. The original Marine guns, just like the earliest civilian guns, were marked with the 3 stars, ostensibly representing General Keyes, because he was retiring, and USMC, both. But the Marine Corps requested that Colt change and remove the USMC from the pistol. This is when the M45A1 appears. When, I don't know exactly, but it seems like it was around serial number 006700, give or take. And the serials even have the same suffix, EGA, Eagle, Globe, Anchor. Civilians and the Marine Corps guns, all the same. So the only real differences would be markings that the Marines themselves added, you know, acceptance markings, that kind of things, additional proof markings. But this is the exact gun that comes off the production line. And I think that's pretty neat, including with the mags. And at the same time, it was priced competitively with, say, the Springfield, and quite a bit cheaper than others, like some of the Kimbers. So I'm still happy with my choice 10 years on. So what are the gun's service history? When it was adopted, July 20th, 2012, it was touted all over the internet and with Colt and even the Marine Corps that this was the first time that a 1911 had been adopted in X number of years, returned to form, blah, 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 and that, you know, they were going to purchase up to 12,000 and production would run up through at least 2016, and, you know, these would be in service for decades. And they started off quite strong. In 2013, the Marine Expeditionary Force would start shipping with these, usually on board Navy vessels, and they started going around the world. After all, it's just a 1911, so production line didn't really have to be set up, and the orders weren't that huge. And so orders would continue shipping. But in 2015, the first cracks started to appear. Almost literally. This Cerakote finish that Colt had started off with started to show accelerated wear and tear. It's a great finish. It's a, you know, a spray-on, baked-on paint enamel type finish. It does a very good job of being a moisture barrier, which for Marines operating in and around and probably underwater without breathing devices, because these are Marines. But it was just wearing and tearing, what have you. So this would actually result in the following year of the Marines sending about 1,000 pistols back to Colt, because in October of 2015, Colt would introduce an updated finish that was a kind of an ion bonded finish. It was a type of PVD coating, kind of like the magazine in our M9A1 here, and it was a darker color, and they called it, I think, Dicobron. But this finish, while it was more durable on the pistol, was less rust resistant for the metal underneath, because this is majority stainless steel. So it's a trade-off. More durable finish that'll last longer, but it's not going to 100% protect you against water, especially salt water and stuff. So that was one major thing. And of course, of those 1,000 pistols returned to Colt, it's interesting that fewer than half really showed signs of heavy use. More than half were basically untouched. Now, you would like to think, oh, these were used hard and heavy over in Iraq and Afghanistan. Entirely possible. On the other hand, they could have been used hard and heavy for training and match shooting. You don't know. We don't know. And in fact, because guns from the civilian line and the military line are the same, in the same serial ranges, it wouldn't take much to fake a surplus USMC gun. Just, you know, put some X'd out stampings on it and put some wear on it. So if you're looking to buy one of the originals, if it's got a Colt letter that's authentic, that's great. If not, buyer beware, because they're going for crazy money now. And again, you'd like to think, oh, this was over in the sandbox and did something, and it could have. Or it could have never left the States and just seen a lot of young recruits' hands and teaching them how to train. You know, not flinching, not flipping, holding their gun on target. To be fair, if you can shoot a 1911 effectively, you can shoot just about anything. And the M45A1 never replaced the M9A1. These remained in service. They had several thousand. And in fact, in February of 2015, the Marine High Command gave in and finally allowed for this. While generals and colonels might love the 1911, the guys in the field were wondering why other members of SOCOM had been allowed to carry the Glock 19 for years. So finally, they allowed them. Glock 19X. This is designated as the M007 and the 19, maybe not this exact version, but this is mine, you know. Has been used by various military branches as a substitute standard, just like the M9A1 for years. So these were all kind of serving together by the end of 2015, 2016, and guess which one the troops preferred more than the other. But the real death knell would come at the beginning of 2017. SIG M17. January of that year, SIG Sauer of New Hampshire would win the contract producing the new M17 with a version of the P320 pistol. And this was to go for all branches. As you know, we've talked about it many times. And this would really be the end. We still see some M45A1s being carried, although by 2017, 2018, you are seeing more and more Glocks and Berettas in the hands of Marines. But there are a few units holding out at the beginning of 2019. And one more time. In March, some photos were publicized showing that Advanced Recon was using some M45A1s, at least a little bit. But later that year, the Navy budget would show allocation for 35,000 M18s, which is the compact version of this gun, just slightly shorter barrel, going to the Marines, and all of those were to replace all three of these guns, even the Glock. So the M45A1 was scheduled to go out, as was the M9, M9A1, and even the Glock, the M007. And that's kind of where we really end the story. I've looked around, and there's really not much more about the M45A1 after this time. I don't know how many of the original 4,000 actually were delivered, presumably all. How many went into service, don't know. How many were replaced, I don't know. I don't think the order was extended to 12,000, but if you have newer data, I'd love to know it, because it just seems like it was kind of, if not DOA, the luster wore off. I think we've all been there, you know, nostalgia goggles. You think, oh, this is going to be great. Maybe for you, like playing an old game and then you get into it, or listening to an old album you used to love, and then realizing that, yeah, well, it's not as good. And of course, this gun was created by older gentlemen like General Keyes, who served in Vietnam. But it wasn't to be used by them. It was to use by younger kids fighting a wholly different war, who grew up on guns like these so-called Wonder Nines. I mean, it's a pretty obvious thing. I mean, this was in no way shocking the way things turned out. But interesting story nonetheless, and I really do enjoy shooting all of these guns. Yeah. One more go. And yeah, one more shooting from Fox there. He was actually supposed to be here today, but we're having poor weather and it's been a long week, so via phone I asked him if he had any thoughts after a couple of weeks of shooting this, if he still liked it. And he says he does. He really thinks it is aesthetically pleasing. He likes the looks of this gun. In fact, he said it's pretty much the most attractive looking 1911 he's come across. He also liked the trigger, but to him, it does have, he calls it snippy, which I guess is kind of a combination of snappy and flippy. Whereas someone like J-Ro finds 1911s very comfortable. I think it's a hand thing. Whereas Fox tends to prefer larger grips. J-Ro does not, so kind of gets into it. It also gets into younger and older generations, I believe. That said, he's still looking to buy one or something similar. He said the first 1911 he shot was a Kimber Custom, and he was able to shoot a clay in the air. And so he wants to try this one again for more accuracy. As you saw in the video clips, it was raining. So our time was limited, and even in the rain, there was just no way to do targets, unfortunately. Next time, I'll bring it out again. But yeah, it seems even after sleeping on it for a while, he wants this or something very similar to it. He overall liked the cut of the jib, and I have to agree. I do like it for a 1911. Everything is in a good place. I like the large serrations front and back. The ability to not just attach a device, but to have multiple slots is nice. I do like these G10 grips. Coming with a couple of Wilson mags, always good. The Commander style enhanced hammer, sure. And I'm sure if you can see them, the Novak sights and the National Match barrel will deliver certainly above average accuracy. And I will say, having fired lots of 1911s in my life, that I don't find it snappy. I actually think it's one of the more gentle shooting ones, at least with full power loads. Of course, with puddler rounds, that's a different story. One last little footnote for the civilian guns again. After the whole finish debacle happened, it seems like Colt suspended selling of these for the most part. But around 2017, the custom shop version at least reappeared with the ion bond finish, the darker finish. And they would introduce a checkered front strap, something that the custom shop pretty much did on all the guns that went through them. And there are a few other small updates, and they still came in the Pelican case. I considered hanging on to one of those and replacing this one, but again, I like the fact that this is mil-spec, and I didn't actually sincerely care for the checkered front strap. It felt more uncomfortable than helpful to me. The G10 grips are more than grippy enough for me. They're actually the right level for me, and based on J-Row and Fox's kind of input, they seem to feel the same, and I really do like the large slide serrations. Ergonomics do fit me well. So, yeah. With that, let's go back to the table and wrap things up. M45A1. Plus. Well, guys, I know you've seen this gun for, I think the first time we did a video on it was 2014. But wanted to bring something in 45 out for Fox, and seemed like a good thing, and he seems to really enjoyed it. It's held up well. Of course, the Cerakote finish was returned for that ion bond finish, which is more of a darker brown, but I'll hang on to mine because these really are the exact same guns that were shipped to the military, the line guns. Now the custom shop guns, well, they're custom shop, but right down to the markings, that's what was shipped. You know, the earliest ones, they had USMC on it, but even the Marines requested that they change that, getting rid of it, just going to the M45A1 with the stars. So that's actually correct. Even the serial range, the EGA, is the same as on the military. It's really neat that Colt did sell these, and well, they were not cheap. You couldn't really assemble one for much less. Trust me, I tried back in the day. I tried to do an M45 clone. By the time you bought all the right parts and everything, you would be in it for what these used to sell for. Now today, I have no idea what they go for. I haven't priced them in a long, long time. But they were reasonable, especially considering you got a couple of Wilson mags with them. And as you saw at the beginning of the video, I got that little rig from someone returning from Iraq, so that was kind of neat. But it's just a fun gun. It's still enjoyable to go to the range. It would not be my home defense gun or Fox's daily carry, but that's not to say it doesn't have a place. I mean, for example, the Luger is certainly outdated. One might argue the high power is. That's a little more debatable. But nevertheless, they have lots of historic value and lots of range fun left in them. They got long legs for that, but I think this will probably be my ultimate shooter 1911 because it is military and it has kind of features that I do like, not a lot that I don't, and the price was right. Yeah, I've owned $3,000 Wilsons before. They were good guns, but the Colt here, it's got Wilson parts in it where it's needed, but it was built to a military standard, and that's good. It's not ammo sensitive, hollow points, round nose. It doesn't care. But if you own one of these, or the later ion finished ones, ion bond and finished, I'd like to hear about it below. You know, these were kind of the talk of the town 10 years ago, and now they've kind of dropped off, rightfully so, because even the Marines have kind of quit using them. But it's worth remembering them. And of course, as I talked about earlier, there were those roughly 1,000 or so that the Marines actually surplus. They sent to Colt, and then Colt sent them to the civilian market, and that was kind of interesting and neat to see them in the field. But I thought about getting one of those, but they sold for as much as a new one of these, and since they're off the production line, same guns, I couldn't pay more for a used than what a new one was, especially with the scrubbed off markings on those. So your mileage may vary, your opinion may differ than mine. I'm probably wrong, but that's how I felt at the time, because at the end of the day, while I wanted a military gun, I wanted to have a shooter 1911 for just those times when I wanted a friend or family member to shoot one. And old guns like these, while they're really neat and collectible, and I don't mind shooting them like for 4th of July, like the Ithaca here, yeah, this isn't going to be an everyday shooter that you're going to put in anyone's hands. Parts are just too rare, especially with questionable heat treat on some of the original World War I ones that have come up. I just don't want to chance it because these are getting quite spendy today. So yeah, let's talk military 1911s in the comments. Let me know your favorite, what you've got. Do you have a shooter? Maybe you still carry one. Not saying you're wrong. I'm saying it's subjective. I know that J-Ro is still very much a fan of these. So yeah, if you could, please do like, share, and subscribe. And if you could, go over and check out the link to the Patreon page. This is Misha, and we'll all catch you very soon next time.